Behind every royal smile lies a secret ache, but Harry's pain was unlike any other. To the world, he was still the Golden Prince, the rebel who found his soulmate in a woman who defied every rule. Their smiles in public appeared unbreakable, rehearsed perfection for cameras hungry for a fairy tale. But behind the polished facade, something was rotting. A quiet, creeping decay spreading through the very heart of their marriage. Meghan, once the woman who brought him light, was now the shadow that haunted every room. What began as devotion had become distance, and what looked like partnership was, in truth, an emotional battlefield. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, it was subtle. The empty glances across the table, the mechanical touches in public, the awkward silence between them whenever the cameras weren't rolling. Harry, desperate to maintain the illusion, smiled harder, laughed louder, clung tighter. But every gesture of affection seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. Meghan was slipping away, not with words, but with indifference. Her emotional withdrawal wasn't loud, it was deliberate, elegant, and devastating. She had mastered the art of detachment while still looking flawless on camera. During royal events, Harry's isolation became glaring. He would look for her approval in the smallest moments, an exchanged glance, a shared nod. But Meghan's focus was elsewhere. She was calculating, reading the room, crafting her own narrative. Courtiers began to notice. Staff whispered that the Duchess was present but absent. Her energy fixed not on her husband, but on what came after him. The royal family saw it too, the cracks forming behind the smiles, and though no one dared to intervene, everyone knew something was breaking. Friends close to Harry claimed that by this point, he had begun to question everything. The woman he had sacrificed his royal ties for now seemed unreachable. Conversations became confrontations, affection became accusation. Meghan, poised and calm, would meet his emotions with cool logic. "You're overreacting," she would say. "You're too emotional." And those words cut deeper than any argument. Harry, once the fearless prince who stood up to an empire, now found himself apologizing for wanting to be loved. It was around this time that the phrase root canal marriage began to circulate among insiders. They said it with grim humor, but the truth behind it was brutal, a relationship that had been hollowed out to maintain appearances. Like a tooth that looked intact but had been scraped of its nerve, Harry and Meghan's marriage was still standing, but lifeless inside. Every photo was another layer of polish over something long since dead. And yet, Harry refused to see it. He convinced himself that Meghan was simply tired, that the pressures of fame and criticism had made her distant. He told himself that this was temporary, that love this strong couldn't possibly vanish overnight. He didn't realize that Meghan was already planning her next chapter. Her independence wasn't rebellion, it was preparation. Her new ventures, her personal branding, her subtle separation from the royal image, all were signs of a woman laying the groundwork for life beyond her prince. Harry didn't see it then, but Meghan's heart had already left the palace long before her body would. While he clung to memories of what they used to be, she was drafting the blueprint of who she would become without him. She had no need for confrontation, no appetite for dramatic exits. Meghan's silence was her strategy, her detachment, her weapon. And in that quiet, Harry mistook distance for dignity, not realizing that it was the sound of his marriage slowly dying. But the true shock wasn't Meghan's coldness, it was the revelation of what she had been planning while Harry fought to save what was already gone. While Harry drowned in nostalgia for their royal past, Meghan was quietly constructing a new empire without him. Under the bright Californian sun, she built a world that shimmered with independence, luxury, and calculated reinvention. What appeared to be a shared vision for the future was, in truth, a solo ascent disguised as partnership. Every public smile masked private strategy. Every joint venture was a carefully framed illusion. Behind the closed doors of Montecito, Meghan was not rebuilding their brand, she was rewriting her own story, one where Harry's role was rapidly fading. The palace would later call it betrayal. Meghan called it evolution. It began subtly. Invitations to industry dinners that Harry knew nothing about. Quiet meetings with executives and producers, each cloaked in personal development projects. When questioned, she spoke of opportunities to expand Archewell's reach, but those in her inner circle saw the pattern forming. Meghan's initiatives were being redirected under her sole control. Contracts once signed jointly were quietly amended. Emails began to carry her signature alone. The "we" that once defined their brand was slowly replaced by "me." Even as Harry believed they were moving as one, Meghan was cultivating an entirely different path. Her brand advisors spoke of her repositioning, a term that made even her closest aides uneasy. She began attending high-profile events without Harry, each appearance more polished, more autonomous than the last. Those who once referred to her as the Duchess were gently corrected. Just Meghan. It was more than a name change. It was the start of her separation from everything royal, including her husband. Rumors of her private legal consultations spread quietly. Meetings were held in secure offices under strict non-disclosure agreements. Associates were told these sessions were about protecting her image, but insiders suspected otherwise. The timing, the secrecy, the deliberate choice of advisors who specialized not in entertainment law but in asset division all pointed toward a calculated plan. Meghan's independence was not emotional, it was financial, contractual, and absolute. The Archewell divide became the most telling sign. Once a shared dream of legacy and purpose, the foundation had begun to fracture. Meghan's side of the operation shifted toward creative ventures, media partnerships, and lifestyle branding. Harry's focus on humanitarian work and mental health initiatives was quietly sidelined. Insiders noticed changes to internal documents. Certain subsidiaries, once jointly registered, were now solely in her name. Yet, when questions arose, Meghan's representatives brushed them off as standard restructuring. Through it all, Meghan's mastery over the press became her most potent weapon. Carefully timed leaks painted her as the forward-thinking visionary, while Harry was subtly portrayed as lost, nostalgic, and dependent. Stories emerged of her upcoming solo projects, framed as Meghan stepping into her power. The media narrative had shifted, and this time, she was in complete control of it. Each headline, each whisper, each perfectly placed rumor reinforced one message: Meghan was thriving, with or without her prince. And while Harry believed their California chapter was about healing, she was crafting her rebirth. The woman once defined by royal rules was now rewriting the rules themselves. Meghan's reinvention wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, ambitious, and absolute. She wasn't escaping the palace, she was outgrowing it. And though Harry still believed they stood together, the truth was far more painful. Meghan's empire had no room left for him. And yet, while Meghan's world glittered with reinvention, Harry's began to darken with confusion and quiet panic. It began with sleepless nights and hollow interviews. Harry's once fiery confidence, the very spark that once made him defiant, charming, and unpredictable, had dulled into a quiet exhaustion that even cameras couldn't hide. Those who knew him best said it wasn't just sadness, it was obsession. He was clinging to something already gone, fighting a battle against silence. Meghan's silence. It was not the silence of retreat but of strategy, a calculated quiet that spoke louder than any confrontation. In that silence, Harry's fears grew sharp, almost feral. The man who once stood proudly against the weight of the monarchy now found himself crumbling under the weight of his own doubts. The more she withdrew, the more desperate he became. Conversations that once flowed with laughter now ended in arguments that echoed into the night. Meghan's solo appearances, her brand meetings, her interviews had begun to feel like public declarations of independence. Harry would ask where she'd been, who she was meeting, why she didn't tell him, and every time, her answers were short, cold, rehearsed. "It's work, Harry. You wouldn't understand." That phrase, repeated like a dagger, made him feel not just excluded, but irrelevant. He tried to hide the pain behind the same charm that once made the world adore him, but even during public appearances, the cracks showed. His voice trembled in interviews. His hands fidgeted when questions turned toward Meghan. Observers noticed his forced laughter, the strain behind his eyes. There was one interview in particular where his expression faltered just long enough for the world to see the truth. The mask was slipping. The prince who had once challenged royal authority now looked like a man stripped of control over his own life. Inside the walls of their California home, things had grown unbearable. Friends later claimed that Harry had started living separately within the same house, his days spent alone in one wing, Meghan in another. It wasn't physical distance that hurt him most. It was her indifference. He would leave notes, messages, even small gifts, hoping to spark a memory, a smile, a sign that she still cared. But she didn't respond. Dinners were canceled without explanation. Texts went unread. Meghan's silence had become a wall, and Harry's attempts to climb it only made the fall harder. Each rejection chipped away at his pride. He was a man who once believed love could conquer anything, a monarchy, the press, even his own family. But now, he faced an enemy he couldn't see or reason with: apathy. And it terrified him. His friends began to worry, noticing how isolated he'd become. He spoke less, slept less, and often stared into nothing for hours, as if replaying moments that no longer made sense. The root canal marriage metaphor, once whispered as gossip, now felt painfully real to him. The decay had reached its nerve. What remained looked whole from the outside but was hollowed by pain within. Then came the moment of confrontation, a night that insiders called the breaking point. Harry finally told her, "I don't recognize you anymore." Meghan didn't shout, didn't argue. She only looked at him, blank and unbothered, as if the words meant nothing. That look, that calm emptiness, was worse than anger. It told him everything. The woman he had given up his world for had already left him emotionally long before she ever would physically. And though he didn't know it then, that silence wasn't just detachment, it was preparation. While Harry was losing himself, trying to save the marriage, Meghan had already made her final, irreversible decision, one that would leave him blindsided. It was a single meeting, private, unrecorded, and deliberately hidden from every radar that changed everything. Meghan, once the picture of poise and unity, had stepped into a discreet Beverly Hills law office one quiet afternoon and walked out with what insiders later called a liberation file. Behind that door, she had begun the dock time process of detaching her life legally, financially, and strategically from the man she once vowed to stand beside forever. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was business. Cold, calculated, irreversible business. The ditch was no longer emotional. It had turned contractual. Her legal team wasn't random. It was carefully chosen, handpicked from the same elite circles that represented Hollywood's most untouchable power players. These weren't divorce attorneys in the conventional sense. They were architects of reinvention, experts at disentangling shared empires and rebuilding them under a single name: Meghan's name. Within those walls, documents were drawn, trusts were revised, and corporate structures began to shift. It was the beginning of a quiet exodus, the slow, deliberate separation of Meghan's world from Harry's. What shocked those closest to the couple wasn't the secrecy, it was the precision. Meghan had long cultivated powerful relationships within Los Angeles, many of whom she now called upon not for friendship, but for strategy. Hollywood insiders whispered about a plan that had been in motion for months, a careful rearrangement of ownership over brands, partnerships, and image rights. Even Archewell, once the shared symbol of their post-royal unity, was allegedly being divided behind the scenes. Meghan's personal ventures were isolated, rerouted, and placed under her sole control. By the time Harry would realize what had happened, the foundations of their joint empire had already been dismantled, piece by piece. Rumors of a renegotiated prenup began circulating in certain circles quietly at first, then louder. It wasn't about separation in the romantic sense, but protection. Meghan, ever the strategist, wanted to ensure that every new deal, every contract, every piece of intellectual property bore no risk of being tied to the Sussex brand should things collapse. Her vision was clear. She was not just a duchess anymore, she was a brand of her own. The name Markle, not Sussex, was being positioned as her future. Then came the internal fallout. Longtime staff members began disappearing. Assistants, who had been part of the couple's joint team, were suddenly let go or reassigned under Meghan's private companies. Insiders described it as a quiet cleansing, a necessary move to tighten control and eliminate any leaks. But one mistake was made. One email, allegedly forwarded by accident, reached Harry. It contained references to asset independence and brand realignment. Those sterile corporate phrases felt like daggers to him. He had no idea such discussions were even happening. Witnesses close to Harry described his reaction as one of disbelief and paralysis. He confronted Meghan that night, demanding answers. She said little. The more he pressed, the colder she became. When he realized the truth, that the woman he fought kingdoms for had legally begun separating from him without a word, he walked out, shaking, silent, and pale. For the first time, it wasn't the media or the palace that had betrayed him. It was her. But if Harry thought the betrayal ended there, the next phase would cut deeper than he ever imagined. Insiders began calling it the root canal marriage, not because of decay, but because it was hollowed out to look perfect. To the public, their life seemed enviable. A sunlit mansion, glowing smiles, and words of unity and compassion. But those who knew them closely spoke of silence, tension, and a love that had become more performance than partnership. Every photo, every tender touch, every affectionate look was part of a delicate choreography meant to convince the world that the fairy tale was still alive. Meghan had turned emotional disconnection into an art form. Her calmness was her weapon, her composure, her control. She could charm millions with a single smile, even as her marriage quietly rotted beneath the surface. The term, root canal, marriage first slipped from the lips of a palace staffer who had witnessed the illusion up close. "It looks intact," they whispered, "but everything inside is gone." That phrase spread like wildfire among those who once served the couple, people who'd seen the silent dinners, the forced embraces, the way Harry's eyes begged for a warmth that never came. What made it tragic wasn't that Meghan stopped caring, it was that she made the act of caring look effortless. She could walk into a room hand in hand with him, pose for the cameras, and then drop his hand the moment the lenses turned away. Harry tried to keep up the facade, but it became harder with each public appearance. During joint interviews, his discomfort was palpable. While Meghan delivered polished, rehearsed answers about their shared mission, Harry's forced smiles betrayed him. His words stumbled, his eyes darted toward her, searching for reassurance that never came. She spoke of we, but every sentence was really about me. And though her words sounded warm, they carried an undertone of separation, as if she were already preparing the world for her solo act. The symbolism of their union was painfully clear to those watching closely. On the outside, it appeared healthy, well-maintained, even admirable. But beneath the gleam was infection. The trust, once unbreakable, had been scraped away to preserve appearances. Meghan's obsession with image control grew more intense with each passing day. She dictated how they stood, what they said, even when they appeared together. Public affection became a tool, not a truth, a performance designed to silence rumors while keeping Harry trapped in the illusion that things could still be fixed. But even the best performance has cracks, and eventually, the media began to notice them. Subtle contradictions in their interviews, photos where Harry looked distant, instances where Meghan attended major events alone, dismissing his absence as scheduling conflicts. The tabloids started to connect the dots. Behind every photo op was a growing emptiness that no amount of branding could hide. Every time Meghan smiled, the world applauded. Every time Harry faltered, it fed the narrative that he was losing himself, and maybe he was. What had begun as a partnership had turned into a power struggle between authenticity and control, emotion and image. Meghan's empire thrived on the illusion of perfection, but Harry was cracking under its weight. He couldn't keep pretending forever. The infection, hidden for so long, was spreading fast. Their marriage had become a symbol beautiful from a distance, diseased up close. And though Meghan still believed she could manage it, still believed she could polish the pain into purpose, the truth was about to break through. And then came the moment that tore the mask away, a moment broadcast across the world. At the Envision 2025 summit, cameras rolled, lights blazed, and anticipation filled the air. Harry sat on stage, poised and expectant, waiting for Meghan to join him. The agenda had been clear. A united appearance, a carefully curated image of strength and purpose. But the chair beside him remained empty. The crowd shifted uneasily. The organizers whispered. Seconds stretched into minutes, and yet she didn't come. That absence, silent, stark, and impossible to ignore, was louder than any scandal that had ever shadowed their names. Within hours, the footage went viral. Commentators dissected every frame, every facial twitch. But no one could have imagined the truth, that Meghan's absence wasn't an accident. It was a statement. She wasn't late. She was done. Backstage, the tension was suffocating. Harry, bewildered and pale, kept asking the same question. Where is she? His team didn't know what to say. Phones rang endlessly. Staff ran between calls and corridors, but Meghan remained unreachable. It was only later that a message arrived, a short, calculated sentence that shattered him completely. I'm done pretending. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just 7 words that ended an illusion, years in the making. For Harry, it wasn't just a professional humiliation, it was a public execution of his faith in her. The collapse came fast. Witnesses described how Harry's composure broke the moment he stepped off stage. He looked lost, dazed, as though his entire world had cracked in front of strangers. One aide tried to comfort him, but he brushed them off, muttering under his breath, "She wouldn't do this. Not like this." But she had. While the media framed it as a schedule miscommunication, those inside the circle knew better. Meghan's decision not to appear wasn't spontaneous, it was deliberate, the culmination of weeks of silent detachment and careful orchestration. The fallout was immediate. Headlines exploded across continents. Meghan snubs, Harry live on stage. Royal rift reignited. The Sussex brand implodes. Every outlet had its own theory. Some called it rebellion, others labeled it betrayal. Social media split into factions, those defending Meghan's independence and those condemning her cruelty. But through all the noise, one truth remained undeniable. The fairy tale had officially ended before a global audience. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Publicists scrambled to contain the damage. Statements were drafted, edited, deleted, then redrafted again. Every option sounded hollow. Finally, Buckingham Palace intervened with a cold, deliberate move, a no-comment statement. It was the monarchy's way of saying, "This is no longer our problem." Harry, once their rebel prince, was now entirely on his own. The silence from the palace only deepened the wound, confirming what everyone suspected. The House of Windsor had washed its hands of the Sussex drama. Hours later, when Harry finally returned to his hotel room, the weight of reality crashed down. Meghan's side of the wardrobe was already empty. Her team had cleared it out earlier that day. The timing was no coincidence, it was strategy. While the world waited for her to take the stage, Meghan had been making her final exit. She had walked away from him, not in anger, but in cold precision. It was the quietest, most devastating betrayal imaginable. That night, Harry reportedly sat in silence, phone in hand, scrolling through the comments, the photos, the videos, the evidence of his unraveling played back to him on every screen. The prince who had defied a kingdom for love was now just another man left behind by the woman he thought he understood. But even as the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, the story was far from over. Because behind that public humiliation, a far more dangerous storm was gathering, one woven from betrayal, money, and revenge. When Meghan walked out, she didn't just take her independence, she took control. Beneath the surface of her quiet departure lay a web of contracts, hidden clauses, and financial maneuvers that even Harry hadn't seen coming. Their empire, once built on shared ambition, had been systematically stripped of his ownership long before she said goodbye. This wasn't an emotional split, it was a dismantling. What had been the Sussex brand, their symbol of rebellion and reinvention, was now hers alone. The man who once stood beside her as an equal was now little more than a name on obsolete documents. The truth began to unravel slowly, like a nightmare creeping into daylight. A financial advisor loyal to both Harry and Meghan called him one morning with hesitation in his voice. "You might want to look at the filings," he said. What Harry saw left him paralyzed. Months before their separation became public, Meghan had quietly restructured their holdings. Foundations, trademarks, media rights, all were methodically transferred under her control. The move had been executed legally, cleanly, and without a trace of deceit on paper. But morally, it was ruthless. It wasn't about survival, it was about ownership. The woman he once believed was his partner had outplayed him in a game he didn't even know they were playing. Lawyers in California had helped her set up new entities, sleek, private ventures with the same mission statements, but without Harry's name. These weren't new beginnings. They were replacements. Insiders whispered about offshore accounts and discreet trusts, registered under shell names. Every deal they had once negotiated together, production rights, endorsements, sponsorships, had been renegotiated with subtle amendments. Harry had been effectively erased. Even Archewell, the foundation that symbolized their joint legacy, had been hollowed out. Its core teams, funding lines, and creative control all funneled back to Meghan through quiet legal rewrites. The foundation remained intact publicly, but behind closed doors, it no longer belonged to both of them. When Harry confronted the situation, the shock was visible even to those who had grown used to his exhaustion. He paced the room, questioning how it was even possible. The trust he had placed in her had blinded him to the warning signs, the sealed envelopes, the confidential calls, the late-night meetings she claimed were about brand strategy. The truth was devastating. Meghan had been planning this for months. He felt stripped, not just of money or status, but of identity. The empire he believed they had built together had been nothing more than a bridge she was already crossing alone. Desperate for answers, Harry reached out to her. When she finally responded, it wasn't through warmth or regret, but through formality. Her words were clinical, almost rehearsed. "It's just business," she said. That line shattered him more than any act of betrayal could. To Meghan, this wasn't personal, it was strategic. Every document signed, every asset moved, every relationship severed was part of her evolution. She had outgrown the partnership, and in doing so, had taken everything that once bound them together. For Harry, it was the ultimate humiliation. The man who had once renounced a crown for love had now been dethroned in his own home. Every promise of equality had turned into a contract of exclusion. Every dream they shared was rewritten with his name removed. He had lost not only his wife, but also his place in the empire they built together. And just when Harry thought he had lost everything, one final revelation left him speechless. Late one night, when the world outside was silent and his life had already begun to collapse, a small, unmarked package arrived at Frogmore Cottage. No name, no return address, just a plain envelope containing the truth he never wanted to see. Inside were copies of confidential documents, emails, contracts, even recorded memos that proved what Harry had feared but couldn't bring himself to believe. Meghan's exit had not been sudden. It had been scripted, mapped out, and executed with precision. Every tear, every argument, every cold silence had been part of a timeline already set in motion long before she ever said goodbye. The contents of that package were devastating. They revealed meetings with advisors months before the first public cracks appeared. They exposed private communications with legal consultants and brand strategists under the codename Phase 2. That phrase, buried deep in correspondence, sent chills down Harry's spine. Phase 2 wasn't about rebuilding, it was about replacing. It referred to Meghan's new identity, one that would no longer rely on the titles, the marriage, or the man who had once been her partner. It was her roadmap to life after royalty, and the details were chillingly specific. Media contracts, independent of Archewell, exclusive content rights negotiated in her name alone, and even plans to reclaim her, maiden brand, Markle, as a global lifestyle identity. Every page he turned revealed another layer of betrayal. There were lists of potential investors, projected income models, and confidential legal drafts, proof that Meghan's financial and emotional separation from him had been premeditated for over a year. The emails even contained instructions for how and when to begin withdrawing from joint ventures, including the discreet dissolution of shared accounts. It was not spontaneous, it was surgical. She hadn't left him in the heat of emotion. She had quietly, meticulously removed him from every part of her world until he no longer fit anywhere in it. For Harry, it was like reliving the heartbreak in slow motion. The betrayal wasn't just about the money or the brand, it was about trust, the realization that he had been living in a narrative crafted for convenience. The love story that once defied an empire had been hollowed out and repackaged as performance. Meghan had not simply fallen out of love. She had transitioned out of dependency. To her, the marriage was a stepping stone, not a foundation. And to him, it had been everything. In the days that followed, Harry withdrew completely. Friends tried to reach him, but he didn't answer. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. He stopped appearing in public, stopped responding to his team, and spent hours alone in silence. The once passionate, defiant prince now sat surrounded by the remnants of what had been their shared dream. A dream she had already sold, copyrighted, and left behind. Those closest to him described this period as the lowest point in his life. There were no outbursts, no confrontations, just a quiet, devastating stillness. The man who had once walked away from a monarchy for love had now been abandoned by love itself. The root canal was complete, the infection removed, the nerve dead, the structure still standing but lifeless within. The marriage had ended not in a fight, but in paperwork and silence. But even in ruin, as the last illusions burned away, Harry found something he never expected: clarity. When love turns to strategy, freedom feels like exile. For Harry, heartbreak wasn't just an emotion, it was the reckoning he had spent years avoiding. The man who once believed he could rewrite royal destiny now stood amid the ruins of his own creation. He had given up the crown for love, only to discover that love had crowned itself in ambition. Meghan's departure had left him stripped, not by monarchy or protocol, but by trust. And yet, in that silence, in the empty space where their voices used to echo together, Harry found something unexpected: truth. It was raw, painful, and unfiltered. But it was real. As Meghan rose higher in her new life, the contrast between them became impossible to ignore. She rebranded herself not as a duchess, but as a visionary, self-made, independent, limitless. Her narrative of transformation captivated the public that once doubted her. The same headlines that had once vilified her now celebrated her strength. She was no longer tethered to royal constraints or marital expectations. She was her own empire now, perfectly curated and fiercely untouchable. For Meghan, freedom was power. But for Harry, freedom had taken a different form, one that came without applause, without headlines, without validation. It was quiet, and it hurt. The media's perception began to shift. For the first time, Harry wasn't the rebel prince or the naive husband. He was the man who had lost everything, trying to hold on to something that was never his to keep. The public, once skeptical, began to see him differently. Gone was the image of the reckless royal. In its place stood a man wounded but human, flawed, bruised, and painfully honest. He no longer tried to defend his choices or reshape public opinion. The energy that once went into proving his happiness was now spent learning to live with his own truth. Harry's days grew slower, quieter. The noise that once surrounded his every move had faded, replaced by stillness. In that stillness, he began to rebuild, not through statements or interviews, but through introspection. He stopped running from the royal shadow that haunted him and started confronting the reflections staring back. He realized that freedom wasn't about escape, it was about acceptance. Meghan had found liberation in reinvention. He found it in humility. Where she saw opportunity, he saw consequence. Where she built a new world, he learned to exist in the remains of the old one. It was in that humility that resilience began to take root. The betrayal no longer defined him, it taught him. He began to understand that his downfall wasn't his departure from the crown, but from himself. In chasing love, he had lost identity. Now, in losing love, he was finding it again. The pain that once consumed him became fuel for something quieter but stronger. Perspective. He had been stripped of title, wealth, and illusion, but in return, he gained something far more valuable: authenticity. And though the world still speculated about what went wrong, Harry no longer needed to explain it. Some truths weren't meant to be defended, they were meant to be lived. Meghan had her spotlight, her empire, her meticulously crafted version of freedom. Harry had solitude, self-awareness, and a peace that didn't need to be performed. Because in the end, what began as a love story ended as a warning the crown was never their enemy. The mirror was.